What's up, YouTube, and welcome to the next episode of my Collecting Goals series. Today I'm going to be talking about a subset that was the most difficult subset I've ever put together. It kind of came to a point where I was starting to question my sanity, and if I really wanted to go through with this subset, this was about 3 to 4 years in the making, would be the best way to put it, and even then, I still would probably not recommend somebody else try this because it's very, very difficult. So what I'm talking about today is the jewel case black label variants of the long box games that came out on the PS1. And I'll explain what that means a little bit further here. So to start off, really the history of the PS1 is that the games came in long box cases for the first couple years of its lifespan. There was actually 102 releases that came in these long box titles. That there even exists more variants of those in long boxes that long box collectors are commonly struggling to find. I don't really care for the long boxes, and there's a couple of reasons why. Number one is that they take up a ton of space. I already have a full Sega Saturn collection that is all long boxes and takes up a ton of space in my game room, and I already thought about the implications of going for the full set of 102 of these, and really what that would look like to have long boxes for all those. So that's strike one against why I don't really want to collect all the long box titles. The other reason is that there's a big inconsistency to packaging, and that just bugs me from a OCD standpoint. There were 3 different variants of how the long box releases came, and so I'll talk about what those are, and then really just what drove me to go for the jewel case variants of these long box titles. So the first long box type case that they came in was the Sega Saturn style cases. No real surprises here. They're just the, long jewel case style cases. They're very prone to crack. Some of them came with these little pieces of foam inside just to protect the disc, but overall, just very standard case, just very Sega Saturn style. These are okay. Had they just kept with this consistent style throughout, I probably wouldn't have minded going for the set. But this still bugs me in a way, just because they're very easy to crack, and I've already won that battle with the Sega Saturn. I don't really want to start it all over again. So then there's another variant of the long box style cases, and that is what we call the ridge box cases. They've got these kind of ridges on the side here. These are a weird mix of plastic and just pasted on paper. So these open much the same way. This is a multi-disc game, so it's got all these games in sleeves. You got your manual inside, no big deal there. But the manual is also not part of the front cover art like you saw on that Sega Saturn style case. So what they did with these is they pasted on artwork onto the plastic. But what you'll see with these very commonly is that the glue dries up on the edges, and usually these are all peeled. A couple of these I've had to re-glue myself, but this case style just completely bothers me. Very hard to find in good condition, and just the inconsistency of that. The other thing that you'll commonly see with these is that the hinges on these are very common to break, much like the Saturn style cases, but you can't replace these cases with a different one because the artwork is pasted directly onto the case. So I can't stand these. So then let's move on to another style of long box case, and that is kind of what we just call the wraparound case. I don't know what the technical term is for these paper cases. These are all paper, so there's no real plastic inside or anything like that. Maybe it's built into the layers. These are okay in that nothing really cracks on them, but they still feel kind of cheap. So you've just got, a paper inner, the manual just kind of lays in there. Some of them have the foam again, and then you got your disc. So anyways, I'm not a huge fan of these either, just for just kind of the flimsiness of the case, and then just they don't really look as nice as the other ones. That being said, there still are reasons to collect the long box titles, because the 3 games I just showed you are all exclusive to the long box. So there is still some reason to have a few of these in your collection. I decided to go in a different direction, though, for my collection, and that was to go for, again, the jewel case variants of those long boxes. So today I'm going to be talking about, of the 102 long box games, the 57 that have jewel case variants. And this is a very quirky set for sure, but I like the consistency of how they look on the shelf, and some of these are very, very difficult to track down, which at the time made it a very fun set to go for. So as I go through these today, I'm going to be talking about just what the title is. Obviously you can get a long box version of it, but I want to talk about kind of the rarity of each title. Is it a very common game? Is it uncommon? Is it rare? Or is it one of just the very extremely rare games that was extremely hard for me to find? So that being said, let's go ahead and kick this off, and I'll go through, like I said, the 57 titles that make up this subset. So the first one of these is Agile Warrior F111X, flight sim type game, arcadey style, I guess. Not really something I'm going to play. This one, I would say, is probably one of the more common titles. Nothing really too special here. Next, we have one of the Namco variants. There's a few of these. This is for Air Combat, a very early title on the PS1, and I would say the jewel case version of this one is uncommon, bordering on rare. I found a few of these in the wild. They don't really seem to go for a ton, but you know, a lot of these just, you don't really see them go for a premium because people don't realize that the jewel case version, it can be somewhat rare in some cases. So this one is findable. I would say it's one of the more popular ones just because it is a Namco title. Next, we're going to talk about Alien Trilogy. This one is incredibly hard to find. I would say this is one of the very rare variants. This one, I got extremely lucky. I'd been hunting this one for well over a year and just ended up finding it in a local store that wasn't charging a premium for it. They just saw it as whatever their standard price was for Alien Trilogy. That's kind of the benefit of this subset, is if you're buying especially from like a chain, their barcodes on these are exactly the same as the long box, so their system doesn't read these as anything special. This one does go for quite a bit of money on eBay. I've seen a few copies buy and sell on there, but even then it doesn't pop up too often. So I would say if you can find this one, definitely grab it. It's one of the more rare variants of the set. Next we have Williams Arcade Greatest Hits. This one is very common. This one is a popular game. I think there might even be a Greatest Hits version of this as well, and just cool arcade classics. There are a few other arcade series titles like this that were only in the jewel case, so this is actually the only one that had a long box variant, which kind of makes it a little unique. Next we'll talk about Battle Arita Toshinden, however you say that. This one is one of the very common titles. However, there are variants of the jewel case variant. This set is very sticky. So this one, easy to find. This was a pack-in title with some of the PlayStation systems, so that's why it has this not for resale little badge on it. And like I say, this one's easy to find. It was, I think, a launch title for the US PS1. Very popular title, so like I say, very easy to find. But then let's talk about one of the variants of that jewel case variant. And this one is very strange because it is the exact same not for resale package that the other one was I showed you. Even the not for resale still had a barcode on it, but I guess they had a surplus of them after they did the pack-in promotion, so they decided to sell CDs. So what did they do? They just stuck a sticker over the not for resale that says 1 or 2 players. It's actually stuck to the manual. Yeah, pretty strange. I don't think this variant goes for a big premium, but it is a variant, so there you go. The other thing that's kind of weird about that series is the second title also had a long box release, so this one has a variant as well. The third title was only released on jewel case, so I'm not going to show that one. But second game in the series, this one is probably a little bit more on the uncommon, maybe even borderline rare, I would say, of the series, but I found this one pretty easily a while back, and I think they pop up on eBay at least pretty often. Next we'll talk about one of my all-time favorites. This is Bust-A-Move 2 Arcade Edition. This one has awful artwork, courtesy of Acclaim, but it is a Taito arcade-style classic. Put tons of hours into this game back in the day. This one's very common to find, I would say, both in long box and jewel case versions, so not a very difficult one to get, but definitely a fun title to have in your collection. I won't talk about this one very long. This is Chessmaster 3D. I would say this one is very common. I see this one all the time, probably more so in the jewel case than the long box, and I'm not really a big chess player, so we'll just move on from there. Here we have Siberia. This one is one of the early Interplay titles that I think might have been a 3DO game originally. This one I would say is uncommon. I do see it a few times. It doesn't really go for a ton, but nothing really too special here. This one is quite rare. This one, I would say, is probably falling in that third category up. This is D. This game is expensive, both in the jewel case version and the long box now. I would say both of these have picked up in popularity. Game is also on the Saturn, and I think the 3DO as well. And what makes this one kind of unique is it is a 3-disc title. So you've got your 2 discs there, one more disc, and the manual. I have seen a few of the jewel case variants selling on eBay. They're very commonly missing the manual, so just watch out for that if you're looking for this one. Very cool game, and neat that this came out on the PS1, and I do like the variant definitely over the long box, so just cool one to have in your collection. This one is an interesting one. This is Darkstalkers, the Night Warriors. So Darkstalkers obviously had a long box release, but this one didn't get a jewel case release soon after like most of the other games that I'm showing you today. This one came out on jewel case variant much later when Capcom did their Fighter's Edge series of subsets of all their fighting games for the system. And I've already made a video on the Fighter's Edge series, but this one is very difficult to find. This one was hard to find when I was building that subset, but as a piece of this subset, it's also equally difficult to get. So the interesting thing about both the Fighter's Edge variants is they have different artwork on the cover than the original long box game, or at least it's been shrunk to such a different piece of the artwork that it just looks very different than the long box release. So definitely an interesting curiosity here, and fun game too. Next we have Destruction Derby. This one I would say is just kind of an uncommon. I do see this one occasionally out in the wild. Very popular game for the PS1, I would say long box. I remember renting this game very early when I got a PS1, and probably doesn't really hold up today, but it definitely was popular. There's also a greatest hits version of this game as well. So like I said, they sold a lot of copies of it in various different formats. This would be one of the rare titles for the system, almost borderline very rare. This is Doom, and this one I ended up getting on eBay. I unsuccessfully could not find this in a store for years and years of looking. It does pop up on eBay a little bit more than some of the other super rare ones, but it does go for a lot of money, and I just got lucky and bundled this with a couple other jewel case variants that I needed at the time. But Doom's obviously a cool game, and nice that it has this variant. It also has a greatest hits variant that is much more common. So I would say of this, the long box and the greatest hits is the one that you'll find most commonly. Next up, we have ESPN 2 Extreme Games, I guess is how you would call that. It's got all those logos on there. Extreme Games were obviously very big because everything in the 90s was extreme, and this game sold very well, long box, and also very well jewel case, and then it also got a greatest hits version. But what's interesting about the greatest hits version of this is it's not called this, it's called 1 Extreme. The reason being there was a game called 2 Extreme, and also later 3 Extreme that came out for the PS1, and I guess to capture on the branding of that, they decided to reissue this game as 1 Extreme for greatest hits. So, very strange. None of them are very rare at all, but just kind of a curiosity on how that game got repackaged a lot over time. So next I'll talk about Extreme Pinball. This one is pretty common. See this game in stores fairly often. I would say it's a little bit easier to get the jewel case version than the long box, but neither one of those is too difficult to find. I really like pinball games for consoles, but this one's not really that great, so can't really recommend it too highly. Next we have Fade to Black. This is a double case, but I believe it's just a single disc game. Verify that, yeah. So it's just one of those ones that kind of has a fat manual, so they had to put it in a double case. This game is very common. I wouldn't say there's anything notable about this one at all. Next we're going to get into one of the hardest ones to find for the set. This game was something I never once could find in a store, and I bought the only one I've seen on eBay in probably the last 3 years of looking consistently. So thank you very much to the seller that sold me this and some of the other very difficult ones to find that you'll see in this video. He goes by Mr. Jordan online, and again, I don't know where he found this because this one is just incredibly difficult to find. There were a few of the early EA sports games that got jewel case variants, and for some reason the FIFA 96 is by far the most difficult one to find. So anyway, very happy to get this one, but I would say if you decide to go for the set, this is one of the ones that's going to cause you a lot of difficulty to get. Much more common than that is Geom Cube. This is one of the very last titles that American Technos put out before they closed up shop, which is kind of sad because I really like that company. However, this is a pretty average puzzle game, not really something I got super into, and like I said, you can find this one pretty easily. Next up we have Gex. Gex was obviously a big mascot platformer hit for the early days of the PlayStation, and I don't think the jewel case version is very difficult to find. It may even be easier to get than the long box, but there you go. It's a good game. Nice to have that on the system for sure. Another easy one to get is Gunship. I'm not going to talk about that one very much either. Another, I believe, single disc game that just has a fat case. Yep, that's what it is. Just due to a thick manual. So, anyways, very easy one to find. I see this one all the time in stores, usually very cheap. I think this one's kind of a sleeper. I would put this in the uncommon and maybe even rare category. This is High Octane. This one you just don't see the jewel case version very often at all. I found this in a store, luckily. It wasn't expensive by any means, but this one I could see in the future being much more difficult to get. Kind of as its rarity sorts itself out if more people decide to go for this set. But you don't see this one too often, like I said, so it's kind of interesting. Next is one of my favorite of the jewel case variants. This is In the Hunt. Very great shooter by the developers of Metal Slug. Probably talked about it quite a bit on my other videos. This game is pretty expensive in this jewel case variant. It is very difficult to find. I got very lucky somehow years ago and found this even before I was chasing this set, and just happened to have this over the long box version because it was what I found in a store. But this game's getting pretty expensive in the long box as well, I think just due to it being a popular shooter. But I would definitely recommend finding this one if you can. Definitely one of the more difficult ones to find. And a fun game. Then we have International Track and Field. Don't really need to say much about this one. Track and Field series that Konami made multiple games in over the years, and this one's very common to get, so we'll just move on. Then we have Johnny Bazooka Tone. This one is notable because it has a song featuring members of Bon Jovi. Wow. Anyways, not real difficult to get. I would say you can find this one pretty cheap, and not really a great game either. Then we have Kingsfield, and this one is not super hard to get, the jewel case version. I would say it goes for a little bit just because it's an Aussie or Age Tech title. This one is actually the nightmare for the people going for the long box set because there's like 3 variants of this in the long box set. Just different artwork, phone cards that came with it that are impossible to find now, all those kinds of things. So this was kind of a relief that I didn't have to deal with all that for the jewel case set. Next up we have Loaded. I would say this falls in the uncommon group. You see it on eBay every once in a while. It does go for a little bit of a premium, and not really something I would play. There is a sequel on the PS1 also called Reloaded, which got a Greatest Hits version. I can't remember if this one ever got a Greatest Hits version. I don't think it did. I think it was just Reloaded that did. I may be wrong about that, but anyways, this one is a little bit more difficult to find, so I would say if you can find it, go ahead and grab it. Next we have Magic Carpet. This one I just don't really see much long box or jewel case, but it doesn't really seem to go for a big premium. I think it's just kind of a quirky title, so it's not really something that people are too into, but this one's a little bit uncommon, I would say. Alright, we're at about the halfway point, and now I think is a perfect time to segue into my holy grail of this set. If you ever see this game in a store, buy it. I'm telling you right now, buy this game. I don't know why on earth it is so freaking rare for the system, but Mortal Kombat 3 is by far the holy grail of this set. This is super, super hard to find, and it's interesting, in my quest to find this game, I did a lot of online research about it. I found people talking on collectible forums about this game 10 to 15 years ago, and just kind of saying, oh, that's interesting, you just never ever see that. I think I'm going to track one down now. So I have a feeling if there are a few of these out there, they are just in hoarder hands. I have no intention of ever selling this either, so that could be probably contributing to the problem a little bit. Mortal Kombat 3 is just a very unique game in the sense that it was a PS1 exclusive that Sony, I think, paid extra to have on the system, but it really wasn't considered that good, and then very soon after, the Saturn got Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3, which I think was considered better, and then PS1 came back and had Mortal Kombat Trilogy, which sold way more copies, so I think this one just got kind of lost in the shuffle. I'm really surprised they even made a jewel case version of this, but very, very happy to get this. I had to get it off eBay from that same seller I talked about earlier, and I just could never ever find this in a store. And of all my years of looking on eBay, only one other copy sold, and it was just a few months ago, but it sold at a buy it now before I even saw the auction, so I just caught it on a completed listing and was really ticked off that I missed that one. But anyways, this is really, if you can find this game, then you'll be okay with going for the set, but if you can't find this, don't even try for the set, because it will cause you many, many sleepless nights trying to search out this game, unless you just get really lucky. So I'll get off my pedestal about this, but I'm super happy to have this in my collection, and I would say this is quite possibly the rarest title on the PS1. Correct me if I'm wrong if you know of anything else, but very, very difficult to find, and I don't really know why, but kind of just gave you my theories on it. And that leads us right into another very difficult one to find, and it's another one of those EA Sports games. This is NBA Live 96. Comes in a double case because it has a thick manual, but it's just a single disc. This one's interesting because I found it in a budget bin without the manual a few years ago, so I wasn't satisfied with that, and found one on eBay that did have the manual, and then upgraded it to my copy to that one. So very difficult one to find. Again, this one would fly right under the radar, though, of a store, and I would say check those budget bins, because you just might find it and get lucky. Then we have a Sony basketball game as well. This is NBA Shootout. This one is, I would say, uncommon. Again, sports games just probably got thrown away during that time because there were so many of these that were just worthless for so long. But you just really don't see this one that often. So I would say uncommon would be the difficulty of that one. Need for Speed, this one is extremely common. I've seen this one a lot of times out in the wild, and probably even easier to get to the long box. Obviously, the series took off much more popular after this, but this is kind of the port of the original 3DO game, and it does get points because it has the Ferrari Testarossa in it, which is my all-time favorite car. Another Sony sports game, NFL Game Day. This one is, I would say, a little bit more common than the basketball one. Probably falling into the common, to be honest. But this one I found pretty cheaply, and I think you can get this one easily enough. That one, for some reason, also has a bunch of variants of the long box. I think the jewel case, there's just the one version. I'm not positive about that, but I'm going to roll with it for now. Next, we have Offworld Interceptor Extreme. I would say this one is probably an uncommon, but it doesn't really go for a whole lot of money. This one is kind of interesting to me because it's a racing game. I haven't really played it yet. It's a racing game, but it is mature rated, which is very strange for the time. So I'm kind of curious what is so risque about this title. But anyways. Next one is Panzer General. This game is extremely common. I see this one out and about very often. Another game, single disc, but thick case just due to the manual. And then we have the last of the EA Sports titles. This is PGA Tour 96. This one, to me, is much, much more common than the other two. So I would say it's still maybe an uncommon, but I found mine easily enough in a store. Much, much easier to find this title than the other two. I don't know if golf was just more popular that year or what, but for some reason they seem to make a lot more of this one than the basketball one and the soccer one I showed you earlier. Next is PO'd. This is an uncommon one, and it's been picking up in price, it seems like, a lot lately. I've seen a few copies on eBay sell for a decent amount of money. Not really something I'm going to play as well, but yeah, just one of the early titles by Accolade for the system. Next we have Rayman. I would say this one's probably common to maybe uncommon at most. Very popular game, obviously, good platformer, and just kind of a curiosity to have the jewel case version. I think the long box is pretty common, but yeah, nice colorful game for the early PS1. Next we have Resident Evil, another very popular game, of course, and this one I would say is uncommon. You still see them occasionally. There's obviously greatest hits versions of this, as well as the, the director's cut, and then there's a greatest hits of the director's cut, and then there's like a DualShock version of the director's cut in greatest hits packaging, so definitely any way that you want to play this game, it exists, but I like this copy. I think the artwork looks very cool, just in this jewel case format. Next is another one of the super, super rare for the system. This one, I really have only seen maybe one copy pop up on eBay. I got mega lucky and just found this in a store, but I have a feeling had I not found this in a store over the last year, this would be still one I'm hunting down online. I don't know what the story is on this one. Great title, obviously, it was a launch game for the PS1, but the jewel case version is super, super difficult to find. My guess is there wasn't really much need for it because they soon after released Ridge Racer Revolution, which was kind of a remix of this game anyway. And there really must be something unique about the pressing on this game because it has very, very strange font on the edge. I don't know if I can compare it to one of these other ones. Most of the PS1 games had a pretty standard-ish font that they used for the titles. I'll do it side by side with PO'd here so maybe you can see. kind of that bold white lettering is what most of the games had, but the font on this one is just incredibly weird. It almost is like some just, I don't know, backdoor company printed this or something like that. It wasn't the standard manufacturer, so it's almost like it's barely up to company standards for how they wanted the games to look. But yeah, if you ever see this one, I highly recommend grabbing it, because I think this is going to be right up there with like your Mortal Kombat 3s and Alien Trilogies and the future of some of the most difficult jewel case variants to get. And then now we go right back to a super common one. This is Road Rash. Probably easier to find the jewel case version than the long box. I see this game all the time. I think there might be a greatest hits version of this one as well. But yeah, just more Road Rash, as if there's not enough of that came out. Then we have Romance of the Three Kingdoms 4, Wall of Fire. I can't stand these Koei history games. This is a pretty common one as well. I would say this is probably even more common than the jewel case, or than the long box, I should say. So anyway, nothing special there. Alright, give me 1 second. Let's move into the last stack. And we are at Shellshocked. I would say this one is a little bit uncommon, doesn't go for a lot. Not really something I'm going to play. Then we have Skeleton Warriors. I would say this one is common to maybe uncommon. See this one fairly often as well. I think that was based on a TV show. Then we have another sports title, Slam and Jam, featuring Magic and Kareem. I would say this one is rare. Another one, too, that you can probably find very cheaply if you find it in just a sports budget bin. I stumbled on this one in a store, but I have a feeling, again, if I didn't, this would be one I would be struggling to find, because you really don't see this on eBay very often. So, nice to get that. Next up is the other Fighter's Edge variant I was talking about. So this is for the original Street Fighter Alpha. This one has much, much better artwork on it than the log box. So that's yet another reason to go for these. So I think this one's pretty cool to have. I would say it's kind of rare. I don't really see this one too often, because the game was super old by the time it came out in Fighter's Edge packaging. I would say it was almost 3 to 4 years old. So not a lot of incentive to buy this when Alpha 2 and maybe even Alpha 3 were out by that time. Next up is Tecmo World Golf. This one is interesting because the jewel case version is super common. However, the long box version is probably one of the hardest long boxes to get. And the rumor is it was actually the last long box title released before they went to all jewel cases. So just kind of interesting history that goes with this one, but this one you can get very easily. Next up is another Namco title. This is the first Tekken. I would say between this Ridge Racer and Air Combat, this might be the easiest one of those three to find. Slightly uncommon maybe, but very popular game, so I think it's out there if you want to get it. Next up is Theme Park. Very easy to find title. Nothing special. Another single disc in a fat case because of the thick manual. Then we have Thunderstrike 2. A lot of people just think this is Thunderstrike, but the 2 is like buried in the artwork there. Nothing special here, very common release. Then we have Top Gun Fire at Will, yet another common one. Yet another game I'm not going to play. A lot of flight sims came out very early on the PS1. Not really sure what the deal was with that. Total Eclipse Turbo. This one maybe slightly a little bit more difficult to find. Doesn't really go for a whole lot, but yeah. Another of the Crystal Dynamics jewel case releases. It seems like they probably had about, I don't know, 7 or 8 of these on the system. There was a lot of these that they reissued in jewel case format. Next up is Triple Play 97. This, as you can also see, is an EA Sports title. This one is dirt common. I don't really know why. This one is by far the easiest of the 4 to get. But yeah, I don't know. There is no such thing as like a Triple Play 96, so maybe they just were interested in this jewel case format by the time that this one came out, because it was a little bit later. Next is another one of the first-party Sony games. This is the original Twisted Metal. I do like the artwork on this one in this jewel case format in particular. I would say it's uncommon. I do see a few copies of this around, but yeah, you don't see it too often, and I'd say it looks pretty cool. There's also a greatest hits version of this too, so. Another first-party Sony game is Warhawk. This one also had a greatest hits version that's much more common to find. I would say this one's kind of an uncommon release, and very popular game. I don't know, not really something I'm going to play, though. We're getting towards the end, so now we are at Wing Commander 3, Heart of the Tiger. This is very popular release that came out on PC originally. Very thick case because it also has 4 discs inside, so 4 discs plus a manual. It's very packed in the jewel case version. Again, not something I'm going to play, and I would say that one's fairly common. This one is probably a little bit more difficult to get. Borderline rare. This is the original Wipeout. There are several variants of the long box version, but this is the only jewel case outside of the greatest hits version. So, very cool game. Again, I think the artwork looks very clean on the jewel case version, so I like that. And last, and very least, is World Cup Golf Professional Edition. Sorry to end it on a bummer, because this is a very common release and nothing special whatsoever. But this is the last of the 57 titles that make up the jewel case set. So hopefully you liked this video. Like I said, this was a fun yet kind of painful subset to collect. If you do decide to go for it, just really hunt those stores that sell games at chain prices, or chains that sell games at standard prices based on barcode, that you can find the variants at the same price that they would charge for the long box. That can help you out quite a bit. eBay especially, you know, really keep your eyes peeled for some of those more difficult ones. But it was fun. I think I'm going to move on to a little bit simpler subset from here. And hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you very much for watching. Have a great day or night wherever you are. Please take a moment, like, comment, subscribe, and thanks again. I'll catch you guys soon.